We're live, guys. We're coming in hot. We just wait for Jim to get back on. So we are live with Direct Line. We are
Well, we're
waiting.
waiting for our guest, Jim Shalleck, who will be here momentarily.
Yes.
He's changing his shirt because he noticed that Dwight, Don, and I were all wearing kind of a light blue. I decided to go there.
Yeah. I mean, Jim's going to be speaking today on basically various stuff from the county, what's happening in the county. One being the elimination of the SRO officers in Montgomery County schools. Okay, I found the problem, by the way. We had the technical issues.
Okay.
And I just sent Jim the new link. So basically, the problem we were having was everything to go live, you got to do a few more things. It has to be done like in real time almost. So I think we'll be back to Zoom next week.
Okay.
And our
This
screen
is
is,
a high-tech experiment that we are using, everyone.
yeah,
And
and our,
sometimes it works.
okay,
This is undoubtedly must be because we're using a Microsoft product, right,
it's
Dwight?
not a Microsoft product. We're not using Teams.
Those of us who are not fans of Teams.
But here's the thing, we are, yeah. And what is the matter? Okay. So we're waiting on our guest, Jim Shalleck. So, Mark, what's happening this week in general in Montgomery County? Any news or information?
Well, I'm working on a story on the new Marilyn Mosby, who is the state prosecutor in Baltimore City, and the new county council president in Baltimore. And federal investigators are going after them, are investigating them, and have subpoenaed documents, etc. And the Baltimore Sun is reporting on this, but one of the publications that's really doing an excellent job on this is Baltimore Brew, and they've really kind of uncovered the fact that let me emphasize this: the city prosecutor, the prosecutor in Baltimore, um, appears to have committed mortgage fraud and has bought a large property in Florida for a couple $100,000 in February and made a commitment that they'd be using the property as a principal residence, which creates some substantial savings on interest payment. No sooner had she signed the document where she committed to be using this as a principal resident that she listed the same property on Airbnb, filed for a license as a landlord in the county she's in Florida, and began trying to rent it. Now, for those of you who are connoisseurs of the special prosecutor, this is one of the things that Paul Manafort was charged with, of taking a mortgage out on a property he owned, a condominium he owned in New York, and saying that it was going to be occupied by his daughter, and then turned around and began trying to rent the place on Airbnb. So this is a no-no. And certainly Marilyn Mosby, as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, should know better, although she claims that no harm, no foul on this. So this will be a story that we'll be waiting to see.
Our guest has just
There we
joined
are.
us. Yes.
So, Jim, I was just sharing information about the ongoing scandal with Marilyn Mosby in
Right.
Baltimore, but we're not going to put you on the spot on that one because you may want to prosecute. You may want to practice law in Baltimore City, do you?
I have a few cases there,
A few cases in there, so we won't ask you to say anything bad about Marilyn Mosby. We'll let the FBI do all of that themselves. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit. Now, I frankly, can we we never said, can we discuss what your representation is here?
Well, my background, give you a quick background
Sure.
and what I'm doing now.
Sure.
Well, I grew up in New York City and public school in New York, Tulane University, and then back to New York Law School. And after law school, I became an assistant district attorney in the Bronx for 12 years. And 3 of those years, I was chief of the homicide division. We had 435 murders a year. I had 30 detectives under me, and it was quite busy. We had 435 murders a year in the Bronx, same population as Montgomery County, which has like 17 murders a year. So in my early 20s, I certainly got learning by fire, as they say. Then after 12 years, I became Assistant Attorney General of New York State, prosecuting white-collar crimes around the state, judges, politicians. And then in 1989, I was offered a position in the Reagan administration and came down to do criminal antitrust, price fixing, bid rigging. And I left there and ran for state's attorney in Montgomery County in 1994, and then went into private practice. I'm in private practice now. I represent a lot of police officers around the state. I work with 6 police unions and my major clients. Plus, I have a private practice as well.
Well,
Most
that was actually one of the things I wanted to pick up with is you do work with the police quite
Yes,
extensively and are very familiar with some of the issues that they have. Now, specifically, we were going to talk about sort of start off with the school resource officers. Now, the controversy in Montgomery County is that there are those particularly on the county council, who are very determined to have the resource officers no longer with the police. They want to somehow handle things differently, and
right.
there's obviously a lot of concern about that. So, what are you hearing from police officers about that?
Well, Elrich unilaterally, without consulting with the FOP, he decided to remove the police officers from the 25 high schools. It had been in discussion with the council and other groups, but then recently, within days, last week, he unilaterally decided to remove all 25 resource officers, police officers at the high schools. He took those 25 officers and replaced other vacancies in the department, but hasn't filled the 25 officers that had been vacant. The union estimates that that was a loss to the police budget of about $2 million. So as we talk, there are going to be no longer any police officers at the high schools. I was in favor, when I ran for county executive, to have officers at all the schools. But now we have no officer at any school. He said in his announcement that he was replacing the 24 police officers with therapists and mental health experts to deal with students and problems in the school that come from emotional or other psychiatric or mental issues. So he's replaced police presence with therapists. And where I come from, that doesn't do any good if some nut comes into school with a machine gun, or some kid has a knife and starts stabbing all the kids in his classroom.
Well, and of course, one of the concerns that many people have is that many Montgomery County high schools have a very serious gang problem.
Right.
And the data says that the average age for gang recruitment is around 13 or 14. So that's really just as kids are entering high school. And even the Mark Elridge reimagining the Public Safety Task Force, which had some, we'll talk perhaps a little later, had some pretty outlandish ideas on school resource officers. They were divided. They had some real concerns about whether or not getting rid of the program was helpful. But let's talk a little bit about the gang problem. I'm assuming that police are concerned that if the high schools are open for gangs, that's going to make Montgomery County a lot less safe.
There's no other way to spin what he did as a pro safety measure. A police officer has a weapon, has a car, has a uniform, and is a deterrent. Um, the worst thing you see on the news is these helicopters over a school where there's been a tragic shooting. The argument against police officers are that uh, it sends a message of intolerance. A lot of people say it shows racism because police can be antagonistic to some groups. Um, but they miss the key point that it keeps kids safe. And I just can't understand it. I just can't understand his thinking. Um, I mean, if someone's offended by what a police officer looks like, I'll weigh that against a police officer stopping a violent attack.
Right.
You know,
But of
I just
course,
can't understand it.
but listen. In other words, they're not just there for the God forbid the situation of an attack, such obviously like such we had in Boulder in the last week, but it's
Correct.
also to address this gang issue. And I guess what Elrich is saying is the way to stop gang recruitment is to have therapists. Is that what we're supposed to take away from that?
Well, that's his view and the view of others that this is a therapeutic issue. It's a medical issue. It's a therapeutic issue. Not to me. I mean, I don't want to sound like an ogre, but there are evil kids and evil adults, and these some kids are just prone to violence, and to me, they have to be stopped. I mean, the bottom line is you got to stop it. You can deal with the mental issues and the therapy later, but that's not going to stop a knife or a bullet. And it's just such wrong thinking. But this whole liberal view against the police is just something that not in my lifetime. I just don't understand where it's coming from.
Sure,
I just don't
sure.
understand.
Now, I don't know how much you followed this reimagining
Yes,
of police, and once again, what's interesting is as how shall I say progressive, liberal, woke, whatever you want to call they were. They didn't even go as far as suggesting they were kind of split on this issue of the resource officer. But they did have a variety of other recommendations, not the least of which was that they wanted to see a reduction in what they would call crimes against society. And so these included de-emphasizing drug and narcotics violations in the county. And again, we're not just talking about the schools here, we're talking about the work of the county police across the board. And that obviously struck me as being rather strange given the fact that we're in an opiate crisis, a heroin crisis. We've experienced far too many deaths here in Montgomery County or throughout the country, but here specifically in Montgomery County, that taking drug offenses and giving it a lower priority, particularly, again, we can talk about marijuana, but I'm focused specifically on heroin and the opioids. Giving that a lower priority just seems to be the wrong message to send for say keeping the county safe.
it's not only Montgomery County. You see the district attorney in L.A. is not prosecuting low-level crimes like trespass, marijuana. Uh, there's a movement afoot in a lot of jurisdictions to do away with bail. A lot of people feel that it's discriminatory, and people are not held on bail. So the whole philosophy in America today against the police and against law enforcement, they're against it until, God forbid, it happens in their kid's own school. But I just don't see where this is coming. It just leads to violence, and criminals should be in jail, and not to have them on bail, at least to reassure their appearance, is just spreading like wildfire. I just don't understand it. I guess they're catering to a certain demographic, a certain voter, but it's only going to end in tragedy. I mean, just this week we've had two mass murders. It never ends because there are evil people, and you never know who they really are. I prosecuted the son of Sam, David Berkowitz, and all his neighbors that I interviewed said he was such a lovely young man, very pleasant, very polite, very generous. And when he caught him, he was on his way to a discotheque in Long Island with 500 rounds in the car, approximately. That's how generous he was.
Yeah. Now, one of the recommendations that they're considering is that this is recommendation 34 would have the Montgomery County Police Department reconsider enforcing trespass laws. So
Right,
this would be one of the limitations would be that they're recommending would be instead of having stay away orders for as long as a year, they would cut it down to 3 months. Now, this is frankly completely contrary to a lot of the concerns that folks understandably have about domestic violence,
right,
because in effect it would require abusers, it would require those who are victims to go back into court every 90 days in order to renew an order and
right.
then have all the questioning about that. It's an interesting, it really is kind of frustrating.
Well, if you think Montgomery County is going in the wrong direction, you wouldn't believe what's going on in Annapolis, which would bind us. I mean, the House bill and the Senate bill, one is more outrageous than the other. The crossover day just happened where the bills have to go from the Senate to the House and vice versa. So there hasn't been the final piece of legislation, but the whole theory of the legislation coming out of the legislature is basically to put civilians in the oversight positions of police conduct, um, limiting by law when officers can use no-knock warrants. There's a bill in the bill to limit when a warrant can be executed between like 8 in the morning and 7 at night. They're basically tying the hands of the police with rules and laws that affect them on the street. They're going to tell the police when they can execute a warrant, when they can use a no-knock warrant, when they can use deadly force. I mean, it's just outrageous. These legislators, you think they'd run towards a crisis like that officer who died the other day? You think they'd run towards it? These legislators? No, not one of them.
Now, the timing of a no-knock warrant is really worth kind of drilling down a little bit because uh, giving the police to execute it in the middle of the night and giving it when there are not crowds on the street or people out and about is potentially really life-saving. In other words, it obviously catches the perpetrator by surprise, but it also allows them to do so in an environment where frankly, somebody is less likely to get into a skirmish with police back and forth, or in a situation that would end up resulting in a fatality. So, in many ways, this is an example, as you say, of really something that is completely counterproductive to the desire that you would presume the legislators would have of keeping people safe. It's really more not keeping people safe as much, but in penalizing police officers.
Well, the most effective warrant and raids are usually between 2 and 5 in the morning. That's when the bad guys are home. That's where they're not as alert. That's when they're more feeble in their physical dexterity. So most effective raids and warrants are in that time period, 2 to 5 in the morning. You catch them by surprise, you catch them home, and you catch them where they don't have all their skills. 8 in the morning till 7 at night, they're not home. And if they are, they're alert and they're ready to go. So the micromanagement by the legislature is just intolerable, in my view. And they're also uh, in the legislation defining when an officer can use deadly physical force. I represent a lot of officers that are involved in shootings. And when a gun is pointed at you or a knife is at your throat, you're not going to react pursuant to legislation. You're going to react pursuant to saving your life so you go home and see your children. So the micromanagement is just unbelievable. And I'm shocked that there's not an outcry from the public and from the media. It's just it's a disaster waiting to happen, Mark. And I just people have to stand up for it.
You know,
That's
it's
what
worth taking
elections are for.
yeah, it's worth taking a look at what happened in Baltimore City um, when sort of the outcry after Freddie Gray resulted in a lot of police officers, I think arguably, if you look at the stats, pulling back because they were
Sure.
afraid of what the consequences were when there was the second guessing, and the number of arrests went down considerably. But the other side of that is that the number of murders went up again.
Right.
And so as a result of that, unfortunately, there were lives that are, you statistically can look at, and the numbers are there, that lives were lost. People who would be walking around today were caught in the crossfire or were ended up being the victims of targeted murders as a result of that. And I think there really is a kind of cause and effect that you can point to as to the tying the hands of the police, or discouraging them from. It isn't just tying their hands, but really discouraging them from using the tools that are available to them and the
Yeah,
discretion that they might have to
I was
have.
talking to the FOP leadership recently. At least 4, sometimes 9 officers a month are retiring. They're having trouble recruiting. Uh, an officer today, the minute they get out of their squad car, they're in jeopardy. They're in jeopardy from a bad guy or bad woman, and they're also in jeopardy from doing something. Everybody's got a camera, so the officers are, they're a step off because they know that everything they do is being filmed by the public. So it's tough being a police officer, and so many of them get falsely accused by people in the public. Uh, but these body cameras are good. I support them, and that's part of the legislation that I do approve of coming out of Annapolis, that all officers will have body cameras. Because in my view, that protects an officer also from false accusations and lies about their conduct. But
It really does go a long way to kind of clear up a lot of misconceptions about situations.
the thing that I'm hearing from officers that I know, the morale is really low. The legislation and the county's task force, they all want to put civilians on these oversight boards to investigate the complaints against the police and to participate in the discipline of officers.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really a morale buster. That civilians will determine whether what they did right as a police officer. And only police officers know, what it's like on the street. And they want to. It's not going to happen now, but the state legislature is going in the direction of doing away with the LEOBR, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which gives officers who are accused of wrongdoing hearing boards, reviews to the police chief, time to seek an attorney, certain legal rights that officers have when they're accused of wrongdoing. And a lot of legislators want to do away with that and put civilian oversight boards to decide whether an officer should be fired or whatever. It's a morale killer. And not only is Montgomery County lost to 25 officers that were resource officers, they haven't been replaced in number. They have been moved to other, but 4 to sometimes 9 officers a month are being retired, and they're not replacing a lot of these officers. So our police force is shrinking. Our population is growing. Gang problem I think it's rampant. And the public is just going in the direction of more rights for criminals, which they
Well,
deserve. I mean, criminals deserve rights, but no bail, and it's just going too far.
now let me talk about some of the other proposals that have been kicked around in Montgomery County. Now, we were talking about legislation in Annapolis, but we can get a sense of some of the things that they're looking for. Um, where do you begin on some of this stuff? We've talked about obviously school resource officers. Recommendation 12 was to reduce officer staffing in specific police districts serving communities with proportionately higher minority populations. Now, the rationale for this was to, quote, reduce patrol officer contact with residents in that district. Now, basically what this is cut police protection for minority communities. And not surprisingly in this, it was a representative of the NAACP's Montgomery County branch that said you know, maybe a more pragmatic approach would be to have the ratio of police staffing in proportion to the population in the district rather than reduce staffing altogether. But it just sounds incredible to me that the recommendation of these woke, these progressives would be to say people in minority communities should have their police protection cut. I mean,
I mean, it should be you put more police where the crime rate is the highest.
right.
Uh, to me, it has nothing to do with race or anything like that. Where there's more crimes, you add more police. To me, it's that simple. You know, another thing when I talk about morale, the legislature is considering making these disciplinary complaints public. And I can't tell you how many good officers get complaints from people they arrest, the girlfriends of people they arrest, the boyfriends of people they arrest. And to make that public, you know, in my view, jeopardizes an officer and his family. So
Now,
I
what
would,
they're proposing revealing is not limited just to officers who were found to be, for misconduct. But my understanding, it would be to publicize all of the complaints.
that's one of the proposals, yes. And that doesn't help with morale. You know,
Sure.
these officers deserve privacy, and it's just going in the wrong direction. But the thing that bothers me the most is there's no outcry. You know, there's no outcry from the public or the press that these political leaders want to eliminate police, reduce funding, and turn their whole method of law enforcement over to therapists, mental health officials. Bad guys have to be treated badly, you know, and believe me, there's a lot of bad guys and gals out there, real bad.
Right.
Uh, there's just bad people, and a lot of people can't accept the concept that there are evil and bad people.
Right.
People that will kill an 80-year-old woman for her purse. And there's a lot of people that philosophically can't find anything to say that someone's evil. They think there's redemption and good in everybody, and there's not. There's a lot of bad people, and that whole concept of evil and bad and good is something that a lot of people don't adopt.
Well,
Surprisingly,
you do put your finger on what is a key difference, but I think some of it isn't so much that is it really is a, how shall I say, a political constituency that looks at the police as being the enemy, and therefore, again, I'm looking at some of these proposals. One of the proposals is to fully automate traffic enforcement through speed intersection cameras. And the rationale for that is they don't want police to stop people because they're kind of so fearful of what the police is. Now, obviously there are, you know, how shall I say? Let me make a confession, Jim. I've made an illegal left turn once or twice in my life. In fact, I've been I've been caught doing that, and paid the fine and paid the ticket. I think that's actually the last ticket that I ended up getting. That's not something a speed camera can really capture, right?
well, there's
And
a
and,
there's all
and it's just so. So one of the things we want in the county is there's an excellent program that the county has. Give them credit for reducing pedestrian deaths, right?
yes.
To try and what they call it zero vision to reduce the kinds of fatalities that take place as a result of that. It's been going on for a couple of years, and so on one hand, we want to save lives by obviously having the part of the role is for the police to be involved in this stuff, but on the other hand, because they don't want the police to stop people because there might be some kind of interaction, literally putting lots of other people at risk.
Well, there's a number of arguments in terms of keeping the police officers on patrol on the streets, enforcing the traffic laws. One, a police car is often a deterrent. You know, if you have cars on 270 going 90 miles an hour and a police car comes up going 65 or 70, people will slow down when they see a police car. Police presence is very important in terms of deterrence. But in my experience, the most dangerous assignments for police officers are traffic stops and domestic violence calls. Uh, police stops also have a very valid law enforcement purpose. Whenever you're stopped, they will do a records check. And when Mark gets stopped for the left turn, they will run Mark's history to see if you're wanted in another jurisdiction, uh, if you have a license. Uh, Sometimes they come up to the car. Do they smell drugs? Do they see anything in the car? So their stop often goes beyond just Mark's left turn. It's to see if you're wanted anywhere, if there's a smell of marijuana coming from the car, is there a gun on the back seat, and the deterrence of being on the road.
Right.
So it's law enforcement, and you can't view traffic enforcement just as turn it over to the cameras and reduce police activity. Visibility is crucial in policing, and it's also a tool to monitor what's going on your streets. I mean, so many times a bad guy or bad gal is caught because they're driving or in a car. They run people's backgrounds, and that's an effective police tool. You know, my clients have told me that if you never get in a car and you wanted somewhere or someone's looking for you, some police agency, if you're not caught in a car, how else can they, find you? They don't know where these people live. So staying out of a car is often a bad guy's way of avoiding the police. So, I'm for police enforcement. I'm for police enforcement. And who knows the accuracy of these cameras? I mean, how many people have gotten tickets because there's a malfunction with the camera, or there's something off with the mechanics?
That's a whole nother conversation. I think there's one of
Yeah,
the Chevy Chase towns supports itself on the camera on
yeah.
Connecticut Avenue.
Oh, it's a big business.
It's a
It's a
big
big business.
business,
Those
but
those,
as
those cameras down there are evil. I still remember. I still remember when I used to drive very early into work into DC and going down Connecticut Avenue, and you have those cameras on both sides.
Yeah,
And I was trailing a van, and the flash went off. It was probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but he kept speeding along, and then he got pulled over by an officer. On top of that, now I believe the law is that they can only get one ticket for that
yes.
speeding violation. But I mean, what a double whammy you're getting with all of that. But Jim, I want to go back to a couple of things that you were saying earlier. I mean, the lack of public outcry, and support from the media and the people. I'm not overly shocked by this. I don't think you really are. I don't think any of us really are overly shocked by this, because if we watch the defund the police movement across the country, we saw a lot of support. At least, there was a lot of political pressure to do that. And the only way some of this has got reversed was that crime spiked, right? And then all of a sudden, like Minneapolis is like,
Right.
oh, wait a minute, we better hire more officers because something went wrong on the other end. And your point
Right.
about deterrence, with police officers, I mean, I think this is something in the school system with these resource officers. It's just that having them there should be a deterrent. I mean, for things to happen. I mean, to me, the public knowledge that these high schools don't have these cops on, there
Right.
anymore. Isn't that an open invitation for some crazy person, in essence, to come in there?
Absolutely. The whole world knows about it. The bad guys know more about what's going on with the police than most of us. And I'm shocked that this is happening in our country. I think you need more police, not less. But I don't know.
what this has got to be a recommendation that really drives the police morale up, or rather down, which is that recommendation 37. Again, this is from the Elridge Task Force: is conduct a risk assessment of police activities to determine when it is necessary for officers to carry a gun.
Right.
Now, it's interesting that one of the things they want to prioritize is nonviolent crimes, but they want to go after, except for treat crimes against society, except for weapons violation, as the lowest department priority. So They want weapons violation to continue to be a priority, but they want to evaluate whether or not the officers should have a gun. Now, that's got to be a prescription for absolute disaster.
Yes. Like in England, I don't think they carry weapons. But going back to the deterrent factor, Montgomery County. One thing I give them credit to the union for bargaining this. Police officers that live in the county, they take their squad cars, their cruisers home,
Right.
and that's a deterrent. That's a deterrent. I think the visibility of the police is very important, and to reduce that is just a prescription for disaster. Uh, I just the bottom line is it's got to be changed politically. We're all members of the same party, and it's just tough that the political dialogue in our county and a lot of others is liberal Democrat policies, and I think the only solution is a political one. To be honest with you, because the change comes from the top. Elrich decided without contacting the police, not debating it with anybody that participated in his final decision, just decided to take the police out of the high schools. And who was he to do that? You know,
In speaking with a number of legislators and kind of doing the back of the stairs story in Annapolis, the observation is made that there has been a growing divide on a number of issues. Now, I'm not quite sure as much on the police issue, but a growing divide between the progressive wing of the Democratic Party with the sort of Black Caucus, African American caucus, and it may well be on some of these issues the sensitivity that where the progressives have this, what can I say? It's a dislike for the police that they're taking out. Many people in communities with higher crime rates are not so thrilled about, or not to be an understatement, are really value the police protection and want to
sure,
have it. And they want to see it. They certainly don't want to be abused by police, but they also value the protection that police provide and appreciate the need for there to be a balance there. Whereas how shall I say, the Tacoma Park crowd, they're off pursuing
yes,
some kind of agenda that is really out of step with the rest of the country, rest of the state.
absolutely. Well, unfortunately, it takes a tragedy. It takes, well, let me turn that on. It takes a tragedy or a disaster like we've seen recently to bring people back in line to think how important and valuable the police are. Um, but it's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, but
And
the,
what I,
the problem with these tragedies is that what the liberals do is that they turn this into nothing but a gun control debate, right?
right.
And not something about where we need more law enforcement or things like that. One of the things that gets me too, is Montgomery County to me seems to have a pretty diverse force.
Yes,
They have put a lot of effort, I think, over the years to really integrate this force. This is not this is not white, officers frequently interacting with blacks and Latinos. There are Latinos and black officers and
yes.
various things. So these people are representing the community. They really are a very diverse thing. So to me, it's like why aren't these officers more accepted when they are now more like the population?
That's an excellent point. I think there's about 1,300 police officers in the county. It's an excellent police force. They are, in my view, I've been exposed to a lot of police force. It's an excellent police force. And they have a great union, strong union that cares for them and has their back. It's a great department. But there's a whole segment of society that just doesn't like police. And look, there are bad apples in there's bad apples in the police. And if they do something wrong, they should be punished. But 1,300 officers, they're excellent. They're excellent. I just don't understand why there's not more dialogue and more discussion and outrage. When he took the officers out of the high schools, I didn't hear anything. It was on the news and then goodbye. And, if I had a kid in high school, I would be very upset. There's bad people, and you can't stop a psychotic killer or someone bent on harm. these guys that have been charged with the spa and the grocery store shootings, you can't stop them. They don't have the weapon they bought yesterday. They'll get something tomorrow. They'll get a firebomb. They'll get a fire extinguisher. They'll set fire to the store. If they're bent on revenge and hate and murder, you cannot stop them. The only one that can stop them is a bullet from a cop. And that's the reality of it. People just
Or
don't
in
realize.
Colorado's an open carry, as I recall. So
Right.
it can also be a citizen. But as you point out, I mean, you referenced the fact that it was a police officer who was responding, who was one of the victims of this
Yeah,
event
you,
in
you, you
Colorado.
can only stop the horror with a bullet. Unfortunately, I mean, I hope I don't sound like some kind of
Right.
Wild West nut, but I've seen too much in my career. I've just seen the horror of what people do to each other, and maybe I'm jaded by my background, but the human race is not not a not perfect. Trust me. And what people do to each other is just sometimes I can't even believe what I've seen, and you need a cop there to stop it.
And that's precisely what we look for the police to do. And we talked about some of the incidents, domestic, some of the very common kinds of interactions police, domestic violence incidents. Obviously, trespass rules that we talked
Right.
about are very important. The drug issue, the heroin problem, these are all things where we really want the police. We're looking for the police to be able to protect us as a community. And it's unfortunate that some want to see their hands tied.
Well, I think you were in New York when Giuliani was mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, I was there for a while too. And he had a policy of zero tolerance. The guys that would come up and clean your window while you were at a stop sign, he stopped them. He stopped the graffiti artists. He fought crime from the lowest infractions, guys with the squeegee cleaning your windows to guys painting on the walls. He stopped all of that, and there was a feeling in New York that crime was to be not tolerated.
Well, not
And
not to digress, it was kind of interesting. One of the things that they were very successful at, you may recall, was there was a officer in the transit police who did a great job of training officers to be able to detect when somebody was carrying a gun. And I think I don't know if it was Jack Maples who was doing it. I may be giving credit to the wrong officer, but they really did a great job, and they were able to um, uh, the way people walked and what have you, and was very successful and very targeted in being able to take people off the street. They also went after, they mentioned the sort of lower crimes. They went after a lot of fare beaters, people who were jumping the turnstile, and they found out that a whole bunch of them had outstanding warrants. So that
yeah,
was an advantage there too. But what was interesting is when Bloomberg got in, um, he ended up ramping up this interdiction program by a factor of about
yes,
three. So what was a very successful program, they kind of had a sense they kind of got a little carried, not a little, they a lot carried away. And it was very much a political choice made by Bloomberg as opposed to following what was the considered judgment of police officers to like, look, here are the things to look for. Here's what we're going to detect. And it actually got out of hand, and then the police got sued, and Bloomberg got sued, and they ended up cutting back with the program. But it struck me, as I've read about this, as a great example of it would have been a lot better.
oops.
Trust the police to, you're still there.
I can't see you. I don't know what happened.
Okay, we're still there. Um, but anyway, of what the police do best, and figuring out what are the best tools to be able to catch the bad guys.
I don't know. I think I can't see you, Mark. I'm going to try and.
We
Dwight,
probably are at the end of
yeah,
that.
Dwight's already given us the signal to that our time is up.
Okay.
Maybe Dwight has snuck in and cut your light.
I just wanted to just one thing.
Sure, please.
This whole movement of therapy and mental health issues. Yes, that's important, but in my experience, you cannot predict the evil that will come out of someone. So many of these violent criminals have kept it in them, and they explode, and there's no awareness of their true evil and mental disease until they act it out. So many killers I prosecuted and rapists, the neighbors, they say, "Oh, he's such a nice boy. He was so nice. He used to get my paper and got me." So the therapy up front, to my view, doesn't work. Sometimes these monsters live within themselves, and you don't know. Your neighbor could be the nicest man or woman in the world, but inside is a burning hatred or sickness. And I think the therapy and the mental health issues should come in after to
Right.
help these people. But before, you can't predict. Anyone is capable, in my view, of writing a horror story, and you can't find that out up front. You only find out after the TV cameras are on the scene.
Well,
I just want to say
appropriately, Jim, you've got the last word, and thank you for joining us again
thank you.
on this particular topic. And Don, as always, pleasure to be on with you. Thank
Same
you,
here.
and that concludes this week's Direct Line.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dwight, for having me. Don, thank you.
Good to see
Appreciate
you,
it.